Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob Opotster, and I have a very, very special show today. I think it's very appropriate that in the lead-in to my show, we have various pictures, and one of them is me standing next to Senator Chris Murphy, representing the state of Connecticut in the U.S. Senate. Today's show is very special because it's near and dear to my heart about the state of Israel. As a young man who was bar mitzvahed when I was young, my daughter got bat mitzvahed in Israel. And what's going on in the Mideast is tragic. And the word in Yiddish and Hebrew is shanda. It's tragic. And today I have a very good friend of mine who is a lawyer I worked with over the years, and she'll tell you her story. Her name is Veronica Reich, and she has emigrated to Israel, and she's going to talk to us a lot about what's going on in Israel, her perspective on Israel. There's so much to talk about. This will not be done in one show. We will be having a few shows over the next several months. But I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, an excellent lawyer, Veronica Reich.
Hello.
Veronica, welcome to you from Connecticut to Israel. Where are you in Israel, by the way?
I'm in my home in Jerusalem.
And tell me a little bit, when did you move to Jerusalem?
Well, the word move and emigrate are probably not exactly accurate. I've been coming to Israel many, many times over the last 30 years. About 10 years ago, my husband and I decided that as a long-range retirement plan, we wanted to retire in Israel. So we started looking around, and we weren't citizens yet. I now have dual citizenship. But back then, we were just frequent visitors, foreign residents, if you will. And we found the plans for a building in a wonderful neighborhood. And we actually went to contract when it was a big hole in the ground. And it took 3 years to build. And about 7 years ago, we got keys, which meant we could come and go as we wanted for the most part. Except we were very busy in Connecticut. You know, my kids are grown now, but there were grandchildren, and my husband was just about ready to retire. I was still actively working, and we had elderly parents, 3 of them that we were taking care of, and there was no one else but me or my husband to take care of them. So we kept coming and going. We went to our apartment once we got the keys and stayed for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at a time. And we would come for holidays. And then when I was really ready to retire and my husband just about had it and wanted to move, COVID hit. And my beautiful apartment stayed empty for almost 2 years. And we weren't able to come. Only citizens could come. Then I was working on my application for citizenship. My husband was working on it. And he passed away very suddenly. He was frankly hit by a car. And I then had to decide what I was going to do on my own. And I decided after a while I was going to come anyway. And I finished the application for citizenship, which took a long time. And I got it and then came here. It's a long-winded way of explaining. I officially became a citizen in October of 22.
Now, Veronica, just want to point out to our people watching this show that we've had some technical difficulties we've tried to alleviate during our pre-prep discussion this morning. And we really couldn't. So at some point in time, people, you're going to see Veronica's lips moving and she's really talking. And at some point in time, it'll be frozen. It is not true that I am being a ventriloquist and saying the words for her. So her voice is very good and she looks great. So we're going to keep the show going, even though there'll be times that it looks like she's frozen, but she has such important things to tell us that I think it's important to do this show today. And hopefully the next time we do a show together, Veronica, we'll have some fewer technological problems. Veronica, by the way, Veronica and I practiced law in Connecticut for many, many years. On both sides, we're on the same side, different sides representing her at one point in time, et cetera. And we've always had a very good relationship. And I've always respected her devotion to Judaism. And I think a large part of who Veronica is and why she's in Israel now, and we're going to ask her in a few moments about, she was there on October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel mercilessly. And she was there in April of 2024 when Iran tried to attack Israel. So she has a lot to tell us. But Veronica, would you please give us a little bit of background about your family, who I understand you're the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and that you were born in Hungary. So give us a little bit about your background of you and your family that gets us to where we are today.
That's correct, Bob. My mother was an Auschwitz survivor, and my father had a valuable wartime skill. He worked with iron and metal. So they stuck him into slave labor camp, and not a death camp like Auschwitz was. Hungarian Jews historically were taken towards the end of the war. So if you got to Auschwitz, you might have a shot at surviving for a few weeks, maybe months, but you couldn't survive years. My mother, thank God, did survive. And after the war, oh, by the way, she lost her first husband. My father lost her first wife and a child in the war. And they met and married after the war. They went back to Hungary, where they were from, and met each other after the war. Then the Iron Curtain slammed down and they couldn't get out. The communists took over and it was a very repressive regime and they weren't able to get out. I was born in 1955 in Budapest, Hungary. I'm therefore an immigrant, can't be president, but that's okay. I was also at a very young age a refugee. So I can understand, based on my family background, a lot of things that maybe others don't. Although I was too young to remember it, it's part of my entire upbringing. It's the stories and the issues that I was raised on. In 1956, when I was a year old, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. A more democratic group tried to overthrow the communist government. And fighting had broken out all over the city, and many of the border guards were called in to the city of Budapest to help with the fighting. My parents, and I always talk about this with such respect for the incredible courage it showed, after Auschwitz, after slave labor camps, my parents decided from literally one moment to the next, we're getting out. If we can get out now, we're getting out. So they literally walked out of their entire lives. I mean, imagine now if you're 38 or 48, which is how old my parents were, to walk out of your house in the morning and never go back. It's really astounding. And I hope that I inherited a fraction of their courage.
Veronica, I want to stop you right here for a second, because it's so important for you to tell your story, not just on my show today, but people like you to tell your stories every day, because we're facing an election in 2024 with Donald Trump, who says he wants to be a dictator for, quote, one day or the first day, whatever day he wants to be. And you and I grew up, we weren't that far removed from World War II, born 10, 12, 15 years after time you're talking about, late 30s, 40s, et cetera. But we have had family. We grew up with grandparents who really were familiar with having lost sisters, brothers, whatever, in concentration camps. When you say Auschwitz, those who don't know, that's a concentration camp, which was a very bad death camp for Jews.
It was the largest one. About 3 million Jews died in Auschwitz.
Okay. But the point I'm making is that people who are in their 20s and 30s and even 40s don't have the connection to what happened when you had authoritarian regimes like Mussolini, like you had Franco in Spain, and like you had Hitler in Germany. And I think people, I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance, it's a psychological term where you sort of forget the past, you have revisionist history. People don't even remember now how bad it was in 2000 with 1 million people dying in the early 2020s, rather, over COVID. So it's important for you to tell your story, because if people think, oh, authoritarianism can't happen here, or things like that can't happen here, that isn't true. So that's why that's why I've had you tell so much about your story. So tell us, do you have any comment about what I just said, by the way?
Yes, I think that what you just said is very important. because I see glimmers of that kind of authoritarianism and repression happening all over the world right now. And it doesn't take a lot to connect it back to the 1930s in Germany. And I'll elaborate on that later. But I did want to mention how and why my parents decided to leave so quickly, because they knew what anti-Semitism was like to the nth degree. They knew what repression was like. They were not able to live freely as Jews in communist Hungary, and they had to leave. So they picked me up. I was a baby. They put drugs in my baby bottle so that I wouldn't cry, because a crying baby would get you shot by the border guards. They got onto a train to anywhere, as close to a border as they could get. And they got close to the Austrian border, and then got off the train and paid off peasants living near the border to walk us across no man's land, which between the United States and Canada, it's 2 feet. Between a communist and a non-communist country, it's miles. And you could easily get shot trying to cross no man's land. But my parents made it across with me and with a cousin who came with us, and got into a refugee camp in Austria, I think a Red Cross camp. But there were a lot of people trying to get out of the country at that time. The revolution failed and the communist government remained in power, but a lot of people got out at that time. So because we had some relatives who got out of Europe either before or immediately after the war, and they were able to sponsor us and vouch for us, we were able to get to the United States in December of 1956. And we lived in Connecticut ever since.
So your parents, you mentioned a point earlier in the show. I can't imagine, at age, let's say 48, when your father's left Hungary, going to a country, let's say China, where I don't speak any Chinese, and having to start from scratch, and then facing the kinds of issues that they faced. You mentioned to me in a conversation recently before the show of something called, I think you said it was called the second generation Holocaust syndrome. I think, is that the phrase you used? So what was the phrase? I'm not
sure syndrome is the right word, but certainly second generation issues. Yeah.
And would you tell me, please, briefly, what is that second generation syndrome that you were referring to for Holocaust survivors?
It refers to those children of Holocaust survivors, second generation, who are imbued with the trauma of what happened to their parents, and how and their family members and everybody else, and how it affected their lives. And for instance, my late husband was born in 1948, after World War II, but he was very much a child of the Holocaust. He was, you could say, obsessed with it, and was very into the history. But the practical effects are, I kind of grew up with the need to be perfect. You had to be perfect because you had to make up for all the children. Even my parents who lost children were lost, and you carried a certain burden of making up for the 6 million, and you carried a certain fear, because it gets into the bloodstream, into the DNA, a fear of what might come, because they were pushed and pulled from place to place, and the repression was gradual, but you never know what's going to happen. You never know who's going to be after you. And it makes it it creates a certain anxiety and a certain level of stress that's always with you. And
Veronica, let me ask you this. Can you please connect the dots for me? The Holocaust, if in the extent there are dots, to the creation of the state of Israel.
Well, many people think, and I think erroneously, that the state of Israel was created because of the Holocaust, because there were refugees and et cetera, et cetera. Historically, I don't believe that's true. But If anyone is entitled to a state of their own, it's the Jewish people. They have been hounded and chased out of every country they've been in and persecuted, not for generations, but for millennia. And you can go way back in history to ancient people, the Assyrians and Persians and Romans and Phoenicians. They all wanted to expel the Jews. And you go a little bit more close to more modern history, and there's, of course, the Inquisition and the Crusades, and culminating in the Shoah. And
what's the Shoah? What's the Shoah, please?
Shoah is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust.
Thank you.
The Holocaust of World War II. Our annual Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust survivors, or those who were lost, is Yom HaShoah, the day of the Shoah.
Does Yom mean head?
No, Yom means day.
Day. Thank you.
Day. So it's.
But Veronica, it may not be a direct connection, but having a state of Israel where Jews could always feel free to go if need be. Right. That's how I grew up. In fact, I can remember at my bar mitzvah, which happens at age 13, we had this ceremony at the synagogue, Beth Israel Synagogue in Derby, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. I bought some Israeli bonds. You probably did the same thing in your generation. I bought Israeli bonds, which were bonds that would be bought for the state of Israel, little or no interest, whatever the bonds were, but you bought it like you were planting trees in Israel.
Yes.
To help develop Israel. In fact, having mentioned that, I want to show a video rather, which I think shows a positive spin on where we're talking. It's a very short video taken from outside your window of your apartment in Jerusalem. I want to just sort of tie into there now. Jonathan, my director, please, can you put that video on? I'm sure it's coming now. It'll be on momentarily. The waiting will get us our expectations very high.
Oh.
Okay. While we're waiting for that, maybe I'll go on to my next question, and I'm sure in the middle of it we'll get you were in. I'm going to jump ahead of the story a little bit. So you emigrated or moved, as you explained your story, to Israel a few years ago, and
year and a half.
What's that, please?
A year and a half.
Year and a half ago.
Officially. I was a visitor.
Okay. So tell me what Israel was like, just generally speaking, before October 7, 2023.
Before I answer your question, I want to make one thing very clear. It's very important to me. I am a dual citizen. I would never in a million years give up American citizenship. I am and always will be a very proud American. But I will say that my heart is here. And before October 7th, we always had controversies, and it's a very vocal and liberal democracy here in Israel. And, there's an old line, 3 Jews, 4 opinions. But that's very true. Very vibrant society. But I loved and love it here. I take classes. Textual issues, philosophical issues. I take Israeli dancing classes. I love the music.
You have rhythm? Wait, Veronica, you have rhythm? You have rhythm?
No, none. I just love the music, and I love the movement, and I love how you can learn about history even from that.
Veronica, we have our video, by the way. Jonathan, you want to put the video on of outside of Veronica's window? Veronica, that was taken after October 7th, right? That was very recently taken?
Yes.
What were they celebrating?
They were celebrating, in Hebrew, it's Yom Ha'atzmaut, which just means Independence Day. It's Israeli Independence Day. It marked 76 years since the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, I do live across the street from the school, and I actually get a lot of comfort from that, because there's something very special about watching Jewish children singing and dancing in Hebrew in a Jewish country. For me, it's very moving. But they were rehearsing for a show or a presentation for Israeli Independence Day. They are inculcated from a very young age to love this country, and that it's a special gift to have this country. And everybody has to do their part to contribute to this country. That's why there is a universal draft, pretty much universal. Or you could do national service, but everybody has to give back to the country.
Veronica, that's a very important 2 points you made that are really critical. One is we are both American Jews. Well, I'm American first, and I'm Jewish second, and I'm proud to be that way. And I have great love and devotion for Israel, but I'm an American first. That's one thing that I think is very, very important. The other thing I think is very, very important is that, Jonathan, would you please put up the map that Veronica sent to me? And I just want to put on and keep it on the screen for a few moments. And it tells you this. Yes, if you can see this map, it shows, this is provided by a friend of Veronica whose name is not disclosed, but you'll see on this chart the difference between the so-called Arab leagues, and I'm not sure exactly which 22 states it includes, but you see that Israel is 7.5 million population, and the total population of the Arab League is 440 million. And the square miles of land is 5 million for the Arab League, and 0.2 million. You'll see that little bitty little blue area, and Israel's got a sign there. That's how small the state of Israel is. I'd like you to comment upon this chart. We can go off. We'll leave the chart on for a moment while Veronica talks about this from your perspective as an American Jew living in Israel.
It points to a lot of things. There are 22 Arab states, and there is only one Jewish state. And why is the world so preoccupied with the Jewish state when there are so many examples of terrible things going on all over the world? But the UN especially seems to be obsessed with the Jewish state. Also, you have to keep in mind that the stated goal of Hamas and most other terrorist organizations are to eradicate the Jewish state. The one little tiny scrap that we have left after being hounded out of every corner of the world, and after so much persecution and death and suffering, it's sort of incomprehensible to me, the unfairness of it all. And it's a tiny little state. Look, you could barely make out the blue on the vast swath of red that is part of the Arab nations. And yet Israel is, quote unquote, the occupier.
Jonathan, let's take that picture off. And I want to just mention, I grew up as a kid knowing about, we used to plant trees. We put our tzedakah, which are charity, and 18's lucky in Hebrew. So if someone has a bar mitzvah, you'll see someone gives $218, or something, and they'll say, "What's that weird number?" But Israel was, I don't want to say primarily, but a huge part of Israel was desert, and growing trees, etc., was very, very important. We only have about 4 minutes left in this show. We are going to do a few more shows, Veronica, but I want to talk about what it was like on October 7, 2023. You were in Israel. You were in Jerusalem. Tell us what happened that day.
It was the Sabbath morning, Saturday, but it was also a holiday. And coincidentally, it was a very joyous Jewish holiday called Simchat Torah, which literally means the rejoicing of the law. And it's a very lively, happy holiday full of song and dance and food. We always have food. Yeah. But at 8 a.m., a little before 8 a.m., when I was just getting dressed and getting ready to go to services, I hear this noise outside, and my neighbor comes into my apartment. Do you hear that? And I said, is that an air raid siren? She says, yeah. I'd heard sirens before because they do the siren on Holocaust Memorial Day, on Israeli Memorial Day, but everybody knows it's coming, and it's sort of a signal to stand at attention. This was out of nowhere, and on a Sabbath morning, and we were just mystified. And I kind of looked out my window, and I saw a group of men who were engaging in a prayer service outdoors, all with their prayer shawls, running to a nearby building. And my neighbor and I said, it's an air raid siren. We had to go into our safe rooms. It's a law in Israel. Every apartment has to have what's called a safe room. In Hebrew, it's a mamad. And in older buildings, they have a larger one in the basement for the entire building. And you have to go into your safe room, and you slam the steel door, and you close the steel plates in front of the window, and you kind of sit and wait. But it was so confusing. We didn't know what was happening. And then we heard an all clear. And we also heard the booms of Iron Dome taking out the missiles that were being fired on us. When you hear the booms from Iron Dome, you know you can come out of your safe room. And that's what we did. But still, don't forget, it was Sabbath. And for those who are traditionally observant, no TV, no radio, we knew nothing. And about half an hour later, there was another air raid siren. Went back into my safe room, still not really knowing what's going on, but thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't go out. And I decided to go out anyway, and went to services. When I got to the synagogue, another air raid siren. And
Veronica, I'm going to stop. Veronica, I'm going to stop right here because our show, we're running out of time here. But when we do our no, you did a great job. I want to set this whole thing up because we're going to do some shows over the next few weeks. We'll get a schedule. It can't be on Fridays because you're 7 hours ahead of us, but we'll get another schedule, and we're going to start the show the next time, part 2 of probably 4 or 5 part series of what happened when you went back and you heard the all clear sign on October 7, 2007 and 23. Before we go, I just want to show that last picture, Jonathan, real quickly. The picture of what is that picture, please?
Israel built a gorgeous new National Library, like Library of Congress. And I toured it. It's a beautiful building. But as part of the display, they had a display for the hostages. And they put an appropriate chair for every hostage, and gave each one, put a book on each one's seat. What you see is the high chair for little Kfir Bibas, who was kidnapped when he was less than 1 year old, and there's a book.
Veronica, I want to leave this as the scene because I think when people are talking about Gaza, we haven't gotten to that yet, and other things, we cannot forget the 1,400 more or less Jews, Israelis killed on October 7th, nor these hostages. Veronica Reich, thank you so very much for being on the show. We're going to have you on several more, and thank you very much. This has been The Bobby O on The Bobby O Show, Bobo Potsner. See you again.
Thanks. Bye.